Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Podcast. This is episode 20 of the podcast where Barry and I talk about board games.
Episode 20. What a milestone.
Yeah, and because we release every 2 weeks, that means this is
Roughly.
week 40. Well,
Yep.
we have been late, but I don't think we've ever actually missed a week. I think we offset a week
What about
over Christmas. Well, that
Yeah.
was reasonable.
Yeah.
You know.
We'll have to look when the first upload date is. But fast approaching a year.
Oh my God. Where does time go, actually?
I don't know. I was a young man when we started this.
Oh, you should try watching some of the early videos on the YouTube channel. My God. I think the first ever uploads you and me.
Well, from the before times.
From the before times. Literally before every calamity that's ever happened.
Yeah, pre-COVID, wasn't pre-2008, and that's kind of really when the world
that's
started going downhill.
Well, let's not talk about. So actually, that's a good segue because I'm generally speaking on the channel, I try to avoid politics as much as possible, and I think that's probably a sensible decision, especially because I'm quite politically engaged. But we will probably have our first ever topic session on the podcast today, which might include some politics adjacent discussion. So we'll see how that goes. And if you hate that, you can find all the time codes in the description down below.
Yeah, Mike is fuming that he might lose access to TikTok.
Oh, did you see all the Americans migrating over to the Chinese app?
Yeah.
That's so funny. Anyway, enough about that. No, we're not in any danger of losing TikTok, I don't think.
I don't know what percent. Not now we're getting well off topic, but I don't know what percentage of revenue from the non-Chinese side of thing comes from America. It may well be that it's not terribly financially viable to continue rest of world, but you'd assume that it would be.
Oh, you think like TikTok might actually just stop?
Yeah, like even if they're banned in the US, they said they'll just pull out if that's the case, rather than just let it decline.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it will happen anyway, so it doesn't.
Oh, we'll see. Trump has said that he quite likes TikTok because he's popular on it. So we'll see what happens there. But enough of that. More politics to come, maybe, in our first ever topic discussion, which is based around some discussion that's come up in the community concerning AI art. And I think it's quite hard to talk about that without talking about the greater context of AI and AI art. But we'll get into that after the board game news.
Boop, 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 boop.
Entirely Barry's headlines this week.
This guy. What's got 2 thumbs and all the board game news?
It's Barry. Barry on the ball. What's first?
Well, lots of things kind of coming out, like new expansions, new games, changes, exciting stuff. So I'll just run through it as quickly as possible to some degree. First game I wanted to talk about was Wordsy. Now, Wordsy is a slightly older game. I can't remember when it first came out, 2021-ish, I think, give or take. And this is a word game, so I presume there's a lot more Zs and Xs in the Polish version, but within the English version, it's sort of standard Scrabble scoring of cards, and you have to make words out of the available letters. You're not limited by the letters that are there, but for every one you include, you score the points for it. If that makes sense. There's a few other bits of the rules, timing, who's first, who can make the longest word, all these kind of things. And I played it, I think back in 2021, and bought it at the Games Expo, UK Games Expo. This is a game by Gil Hova. We also did High Rise and the Networks. And I've had a great time with this game, but I've never heard anybody else really talk about it beyond that 1 year when I bought it. Everybody seemed to play it at the time, and it's kind of fallen away, but I keep looking for excuses to pull it out. And the republication, so this revised edition to some degree, I think it's got a new publisher, certainly got a new box, new art, but the core gameplay remains the same, and I recommend that everybody give it a go if they can. Shouldn't be terribly expensive. It's, an egg timer, some cards, and a score pad. I'm sure everybody can perhaps, make it at home. print and play. But you should buy it.
Oh, interesting stuff. Well, I'm interested to check it out. I've never had a chance to play it.
So I'm saying, like, a lot of people haven't, but I seen this was getting reprinted, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to talk about it because I really like it.
Brilliant.
A game I don't like quite as much, but I've only played it on Board Game Arena, is Survive the Island. Have you played it yet?
Am I correct in thinking that this is just Survive Escape from Atlantis?
I've not played Survive Escape from Atlantis, so...
So are you putting meeples that are worth points onto an island that's sinking,
Yes.
and then you have to sort of like collectively get them off?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think this is just the latest edition of Survive Escape from Atlantis.
Gotcha. Well,
Which I do have and have played a lot.
Gotcha. I hadn't played it before at all, which is why I didn't know this Escape from Atlantis version. But it was on Board Game Arena. I gave it a go, and then it was okay, but wasn't setting my world alight. And then I seen there was a small expansion coming out this year for new beasts. So I don't know if Atlantis had whales and Godzillas and...
So I see that this has added whales, krakens, and pterodactyls, and some extra tiles and rules. So I think some of this will be new. The original Survive Escape from Atlantis, I don't know if it had any expansions. The 25th anniversary edition, so it's a very old game, did have some expansions, which did include whales and krakens. Originally, it was just sharks, I think. Or maybe the whales were in the base game and the krakens were an expansion. Anyway, and then dolphins, and I think dolphins were an expansion. But, you know, like... There was, I mean, it's one of those sort of games that people had when they were kids, and the original one came with these big plastic pieces, which were very satisfying. The 25th anniversary edition got rid of those and replaced them with cardboard tiles of varying thickness because they represent beaches, forests, and mountains, so the tiles get thicker and they go sort of, and so that's quite satisfying as well, even though they're not as, potentially not as pleasing as the big plastic pieces. They are actually probably more practical. But I've not played this new edition. It is, you know, it's kind of a crowd pleaser because it's super easy to teach and anyone can play it. And it's got those moments of sort of tension and excitement because you're rolling dice, and on your turn you functionally just take 3 actions with your guys, your people, and you're trying to get them off the island and onto the sort of the safe harbors around the board edge while the island in the middle sinks. Thematically, it makes sense for Atlantis. I guess they didn't think the theme was too important because they seem to have got rid of the Atlantis thing entirely. Maybe Survive the Island just gives them broader scope for more different kinds of monsters. But, you know, then after you've taken all your actions, you get to roll a monster die or a sea enemy die and control the monsters and screw over your friends, basically. And part of the appeal is there are these boats that carry up to 3 people, and they're by far the most efficient way to get to the outside of the map. But only the person with the most people in the boat can control it. So if you throw one in there, you're at the mercy of your friend to actually control the boat. If you're tied, you can both control the boat. But then also if there's a 3rd or 4th player who's not in the boat, they'll probably try and sink it with a whale. So it's just silly. You could argue that there's some skill because each of the meeples has a number printed on the bottom between 1 and 6, and at the end of the game, that's how many points they're worth. So you want to try to save the higher numbers, but once you put them down on the island, you can't check them again. So there's a memory game element to it. You don't have to play with that rule, but I don't think you can check your meeples anytime is an official variant. So I think it is intended to be a memory game like that. Anyway.
Yeah, it is an option on Board Game Arena whether you're allowed to look at the bottom of your guys again. I didn't understand how the game played. You find that a lot of games I play on Board Game Arena, I just have a look at, does that look difficult? No, I'll give it a go. And I put all my guys down, didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing. And then, because I couldn't look at them again, it was very much blind luck as to who was actually getting rescued.
Well,
so I'd certainly give it another go, and I'd be interested in playing with the new monsters if somebody had it in real life.
Yeah. The reality is, I think even if you remembered all the numbers, it wouldn't have actually helped you determine which to save and which to die because it's kind of just all blind luck.
Yeah.
It's not like your opponents can pick and choose different people. You know, I suppose you could argue, much like in Kelp, with the rock, paper, scissors combat, you can argue there's a bit of a mind game there. You could argue there's a bit of a mind game in like Barry's trying to save that one first, therefore that one must be the 6. Get it? But it's, whether or not they actually can do anything about it really depends on what they roll on the monster die and what monsters have come out so far. But it's a super accessible crowd pleaser is the way I'd describe it. I almost never bring it out to play with board game people, but if I have a crowd of mixed people or, people who just aren't hobby gamers, it's one that I find engaging enough to play, without wanting to tear my hair out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's cool that they're adding new stuff as well. That's cool. I hadn't seen that.
Well, it seems to be like a sort of recurring theme, right? All these games that are getting these reprints and these later reprints and expansions that nobody expected to see, mostly Knizia's stuff, but other people as well. And actually, speaking of expansions that nobody expected to see, just one I caught last night was there is a GameFound or Kickstarter GameFound expansion for Nanty Narking. Which itself was a re-implementation of Discworld, Ankh-Morpork.
Yep.
I've not played Nanty Narking.
Me neither.
This is I have played Discworld, Ankh-Morpork. Enjoyed it. But this is a Cthulhu expansion, which is odd. So my understanding is Nanty Narking's like Victorian, Edwardian London.
Yeah, I think so.
And then they've thrown Cthulhu in.
Because why not?
Other games have done the same. Can't argue with it. Kemet with a new one. But again, I don't think anybody was expecting this to get any kind of updates or expansions. I think the base game already tweaked a few of the rules in Discworld, and everybody considered that complete. So there's not a huge amount of details yet up about what's on within the expansion, but one to keep an eye on if you like Cthulhu or if you like the game.
Am I crazy? Was Ankh-Morpork Martin Wallace?
I want to say it was.
Okay, and I'm just wondering if Nanty Narking involved Martin Wallace and whether this does.
So I don't think he's mentioned. I think he was Nanty Narking. And I don't think it's mentioned for the expansion, whether he's involved or not.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's still quite new. It was only last night it was kind of put up. So whether or not he's involved with it, unclear.
Fair enough.
We'll find out when it launches in some amount of time.
Some amount of time, yeah. Sometimes the previews have countdowns and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I just had a quick look. It does not. But then speaking for games where nobody expected an expansion, I'm almost loath to mention it.
I was surprised to see this actually. Like this real came out of left field.
3 expansions for potentially the most popular game in the world. And that is Monopoly.
Yeah, unbelievable. Actually, probably is the most, when you say popular, at least by purchasing levels, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't mean a new version. I don't mean a weird theming. I don't mean some sort of spin-off. I mean literal expansions to base Monopoly.
Yeah. Monopoly from 1935.
Yeah, a mere 90 years to get an official expansion released. So it comes in 3 parts. There are 3 different expansions you can add. And generally, they kind of codify a number of house rules, it seems. First one being go to jail. Now, it should be worth noting that all the expansions claim to have the playtime.
Yeah, which I thought was brilliant.
If you add all 3 of them, if that's half of a half of a half, which makes it a much more reasonable 15-minute game.
Yeah, an eighth of the length.
15 minutes. But going from 8 hours to 4 hours, no, that's no good. So going to jail, they say you can get corruption cards. You can go to super jail, which if I know anything about jails, is one worse than normal jail. And seems to make when you draw chance cards and community chest cards, you have to roll in case you get caught for something. It just makes it a little riskier, not the sort of easy money stops that they currently are.
So they're just calling it the Go to Jail expansion.
Go to Jail expansion, yeah.
Wow.
The second one is Buy Everything. Again, claims to half the time. But in this one, you can buy the jail. You can buy free parking. You can buy the community chest spots. It gives players special powers and alternative ways to win, which is probably the most interesting one out of the three, and actually out of everything that's going on there. So it could be something like own all the railways. Suddenly the value of having that fourth railway is more than just the value that's printed on it, or get a hotel on Mayfair. So, whilst it's great to have a hotel on Mayfair anyway, if somebody manages it, they win the game. And it just ends it. So
I do not see how own all the railways is an alternate win condition, because either you land on them all, which is pure fluke, and then you win, or someone else gets one and will never trade it to you because otherwise you'll just win.
Yeah.
So it's not like you have any autonomy or control over that win condition.
No, but sometimes people would pay you with a railway because they didn't want it.
Well, and now they can't because you'll just win.
Yeah, right. So now they've got to scrounge up the money from wherever, and be like, becomes more valuable. Somebody going bust with three railways, where they have to, give you the properties, could be a win condition now. So rather than having to end the game by bankrupting everybody, maybe you could just bankrupt this one person to get that last railway you want. I think it's probably the most interesting aspect and the biggest shake up to this.
It's still not like you can deliberately target people when you're trying to bankrupt them.
No.
It would still be just fluke. But yeah, I appreciate more end game conditions anyway,
yes,
just
there
because
there are more ways to fluke it.
Yes, because then it makes the game shorter, keeping to that promise of halving game length.
Yeah. The final expansion seems to be a variant on what's the most common house rule in Monopoly, and this expansion is the free parking jackpot. So again, claims to half the time, but it adds all of these expansions add sort of an extension to the board, kind of sits over part of the board and adds a little bit of stuff. But this one sits over the free parking corner and adds a spinner for what you can get when you land on free parking. So I don't think you're still paying, your super tax into free parking, and whoever lands on it gets it. Instead, it is a space where you can get something by spinning. You could win properties there, you can win houses or hotels there, you can win cards there, and just makes, without having the crazy bust free parking rule where you're paying everything to the bank into this free parking spot. Instead, there is some benefit to landing on there.
I mean, there's no better way than to make Monopoly even longer and more miserable than keeping all that money in the economy.
Yeah.
I don't understand that house rule, but we used to play it as kids, so it's definitely a thing. Wonder where that came from.
So many people think it's a real rule. It's that ubiquitous.
Yeah.
But yeah, strange one, odd one. But yeah, I don't know. They should all be out sometime relatively soon, I think. If anybody's buying them, then you're probably not listening or watching this. But
yeah. Well, feel free to send us a message at askreadysteadypodcast@gmail.com and let us know what you thought of them. I want to know why free parking jackpot's not called the casino, alternate spot casino.
Probably because gambling's less family friendly, but having a spinner on free parking, totally legit.
Right, so it's okay to put in actual gambling so long as thematically it's not gambling.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Just checking. And bankrupting people and destroying their livelihoods. That's also fine.
Well, that's life. So.
Get on with the lessons. Yeah.
From a young age. A couple other bits and pieces, a couple of quick ones. New standalone in the Everdell universe, Everdell Silverfrost. So much like Far Shore, I want to say it was called, which is Everdell, but different. Came out previously. There's now a new version coming to Kickstarter which is the same thing, Everdell, but different. Although there's probably still going to be a ton of barge toads in this new version as well.
If they take out the barge toad, I'll be so disappointed.
No, he's a staple. In fact, people were starting to get their Everdell duos, but I'm just buying mine at retail. Not got them yet. Then there was also Vale of Eternity, which I quite enjoy, a little not trick-taking game, a tableau building, open drafting game. And they recently released, or last year released, Artifacts, which added a little bit extra to the game, where you're not just drafting the cards for the middle, you can also get these artifacts and these special powers. Although every card has its own special power, so it wasn't that different. There's a new expansion coming this year called Curse, but there's not much information on it. But with how good Artifacts was, it really rounds out the game a little bit. I'd be optimistic that Curse is more of a, let's say, if Artifacts was leaders, then Curse is cities, more than the crappy bits of Babel that nobody played for Seven Wonders.
Yeah, and I do feel like cities and leaders are somewhat auto-includes for me in Seven Wonders. So, yeah.
And then one for the wargamers and miniature players, Gundam Assemble. So this is from Bandai, and it is a new Gundam skirmish miniatures game announced. There is some information out there, but I didn't want to learn it. So I had a quick look and I was like, oh, cool, Gundams. And that would be the selling point. But it could open up, miniature gaming to a slightly new audience. Halo. What's the new Halo game that just came out from Mantic?
Flashpoint.
Flashpoint, that was a tactical miniatures game. So again, it's kind of opening up miniature gaming to demographics that might not traditionally be interested in it. Which I think's cool.
But just on the topic of like Flashpoint, Halo Flashpoint, and Gundam, like I don't feel like that's for the youth, right? Like
no,
that's for like jaded millennials, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much at this point. Certainly, the Halo franchise as a whole needs to not go out the park to really generate any new interest from people. Gundams have their own niche audience, and they're not necessarily one that's interested in either board games or miniatures games, but they like the models typically, and having something to do with those models or similar models may well attract them into it, at which point, the world's your oyster, the
Gundam,
possibilities it opens up.
Gundam and miniatures games seems to make sense. Halo somewhat makes sense, although I don't know enough about Halo, really. I played the games when I was a kid, but like I think there's only 3 factions, isn't there? The Humans, the Covenant, and the Flood?
Well, yeah, and then the Covenant kind of break off or split back up again, so there's a couple of things you can do with that, but yeah, there's not. In fact, I think Flashpoint only has Spartan v Spartan. Okay,
so that again, which is again something that I understood was in the multiplayer, but it's never in the single player of the games I played a thing.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, I guess. But I mean, thematically a bit of a reach, I suppose. Anyway, but Gundam seems to lend itself better to that kind of sort of skirmish battles as a thematic thing. But as an aside, I was just trying to think of like if I was going to make a miniature skirmish game to get the youth into miniatures gaming, what would I theme it around? And the answer is I actually don't know. I'm so out of touch. I have no idea.
Yeah, am I out of touch? No, it's the kids that are wrong.
But I feel like Warhammer's just fine. Like that's still a really strong IP, and kids know what it is, and they keep making video games.
Yep. So Warhammer 40k. I don't know. It was interesting. It looks interesting enough. It looks different enough. You've only got a couple of Gundams, so proper skirmish style game.
Okay.
You don't need a huge number of minis, but I don't know what the game's like enough to recommend it yet. But that was a bit out of left field. I do feel like Bandai stretching themselves a bit in the gaming department. I don't know how involved the company as a whole is in each of these individual prospects, but certainly their card games suffer from just too many of them. Supporting 2 versions of the Dragon Ball card game, One Piece. What else have they got? Battle Spirits. It's like 2 others as well. It seems an odd decision for where they focus their efforts. But what do I know?
Yeah. Fair enough.
And that was pretty much it. Everything I'd seen in the last couple of weeks.
I have not got any news to bring to the table today, so I guess we'll call that a news segment, and we'll move on to the first ever topic discussion, possibly also the last ever. This is not going to be a new recurring segment. We don't need more content. We just want to talk about board games. But I wanted to talk about this because I thought it was important, and I've seen a lot of vitriol going back and forth in the community. And if you're not interested, like I said earlier, all of the links are in the description, so you can just skip ahead to the what we played this week's section coming up shortly. But this is the topic here is AI art and board games, and this has come up because of the community uproar over the AI art in Foxpaw, which is currently live on GameFound. It is a magical worker placement board game. That's the publisher's copy. And it's being review bombed because it uses AI art. And the community has been getting on at each other because it seems to be the position of people who are rating it poorly that AI art bad. And it seems to be the position of people that are rating it 10s highly, review bombing bad. So sort of a disagreement from 2 different sides. There also are people rating it a 10 because AI art good or not a problem. But it's hard to. So the publisher of the game is Gato Games, and I only know them from their previous Kickstarter campaign, Among Cultists, which I missed entirely when it was on crowdfunding. And I actually only really know of it because they reached out to me. I guess they got my email from some media content creator situation somewhere. But they reached out to me and they just said, like, hey, we're looking for reviewers for our game. Would love to send you a copy. There's literally no obligation on your part to do anything with it. Would you like a copy? Which I thought was actually a really, the best way to handle media engagement, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's better to have a separation between content creators and publishers. I think it leads to less, bias and more objective appraisal of games. And when you don't feel obligated to create something, it also lets you focus on creating content that you think will be most valuable to the community, to people who purchase games. So, my only interaction with them had actually been entirely very positive. Now, this is not necessarily in line with there have been complaints about their business practices, particularly around what we call or what has been termed generating hype on Board Game Geek. And that's sad to see. I don't know how critical I'll be of most of these practices, because to an extent, business is gonna business, right? Like, you can't really hold a publisher, to a very high standard when they're just trying to generate interest in their game, I mean, you should hold them to a reasonable standard, but also your expectation should be they're going to push their game, right? They're going to push their game as much as they can. And it's up to us to figure out on a personal level where we think too much is too much, right? But it seems to be the opinion of a lot of people that BGG is quite a sacrosanct place where we should be adding unbiased and, community sort of focused content, which is not the case because, everybody in the industry engages on BGG. It's a forum for everybody, and a lot of people who are in this industry work in it, so they're not going to be unbiased. They're not going to be, they're going to have all their own particular biases, and that's fine. Anyway, moving on. Foxpaw has never concealed the use of AI art in the game. And they seem to be doing well on GameFound. Far be it from me to appraise what is and isn't good, but they've raised almost €250,000, and they've got over 2,500 backers. And they've risen to the top of the hotness on BGG or close to it, simply because of everyone visiting the page, because of all this AI art controversy. And I don't think it would be entirely fair to them to sort of deep dive into this a little bit without first discussing or sharing their statement. They actually made a very short statement, which I'll skip because they made a much longer one, and now I'm going to read it. So sorry, everyone, but I think that that's important to do. So they've written, "Dear all, the topic of AI currently seems to be highly discussed and unfortunately judged, especially in the context of our campaign. We understand and respect every opinion, however, it should remain objective and constructive. We decided to integrate AI into our project as a part of the process, and we've never hidden this fact. We updated the campaign FAQ as soon as the landing page was created. Nevertheless, we are very sorry that this topic was apparently not communicated sufficiently from our side. For us, progress is essential, and that includes adopting new technologies. We've seen similar methods used by far larger publishers with much bigger campaigns, and we adapted them. We sincerely apologize for using AI, however, we want to emphasize that a significant part of our project is created by amazing artists. As mentioned, the key elements, such as the main box cover, board game, house badges, and logo, were all created by artists. We've found wonderful artists whose work we highly value, and they should in no way be devalued by this debate. Unfortunately, this storm of criticism has now affected many people who do not deserve it. Please stop attacking YouTubers, content creators, and artists for the mistake we have made. There have already been very harsh words and even threats, which have no place in such a wonderful hobby. That is truly sad, and it cannot be justified. Following requests from some artists, we have now removed their names from the campaign. It has come to this point. Cyberbullying should never be tolerated and can be prosecuted under criminal law. On BGG, an account cannot create hype, as is currently being claimed. Those familiar with BGG know that the hype is generated through clicks. However, we have never directed our community to BGG through links from the campaign. We didn't even upload the rules on BGG to direct people there. Nor did we run a BGG giveaway, which generates a lot of clicks, or any BGG ads. None of that happened. What did happen was a large AI-related debacle that we did not initiate, and it alone caused the increase in clicks and posts. Over the past few years, we have met many wonderful people in the community who know us well enough to judge our intentions. We are not bad people. We are simply a small indie team pursuing our passion as a part-time job. We thank everyone who is excited about this magical game as we are. We invested a lot of work and time into our project and are proud to share this amazing game with you. We will learn from this experience and look forward to the future with you in this wonderful hobby. We want to express our gratitude to everyone who supports us. Thank you all for your fairness. Team Gatto Games." And we'll get into sort of AI art in general in a bit. I think there is this section around an account cannot create hype is this reference to some people trying to claim that they're posting in their own forums and stuff like that. I'm, under some fake account or account that doesn't seem to be officially linked to their own company. I don't really care too much about that, personally. Maybe that's a hot topic for you, but personally for me, I think this AI stuff is sort of bigger and more interesting. And obviously we don't condone cyberbullying. You should never be making this personal, or at least a personal attack against artists that work with the company or anything like that. And, as a consumer, really your prerogative is to decide whether or not you want to buy something. And if you decide to boycott it for any reason, then you've done your part. And that's kind of where it should end, right? Obviously, it's all in relation to the magnitude of the crime, so to speak. But I think, in board gaming, it's hard to find an offense so grand that it should extend to cyberbullying or doxing or anything like that, That shouldn't be happening. Um, it is, I think, somewhat disingenuous in that they've apologized several times for using AI art, but that's it, right? I can understand, I'm pretty sure a sincere apology kind of sounds like, we are sorry for using AI art. We can understand why you don't like that. Here's what we're doing to fix it. But there's none of that. There's just, we're sorry for using AI art, and we're not going to change any of our approach. So really, this has very much the flavor of like, we're sorry you're offended, but too bad. Which is, fair enough. If they believe in their method and they like this method, and they want to use it, fine. As I said, as the consumer, boycotting them, that's our prerogative, or, the prerogative of the consumers. And as, media entities here, all we can really do is observe and offer our, subjective opinions. With that in mind, there was a little bit more of this happening as well with Dragon's Down, wasn't there? People were talking about the art in that because it was AI based. And, obviously transparency, hugely important, right? Like if people don't talk about using AI tools and then you receive a game that has clearly got AI art in it and you didn't know that it would, that's not great. Again, not illegal, but you're going to offend a lot of, potentially upset a lot of your supporters. And as a business, you don't want to do that. Reputational damage is a thing. And so you should be transparent, I think, if you're using these kinds of techniques, and let people make up their own minds, And there's nothing, the only thing good that can come of hiding it is that you might sell more copies of this one game, but over the long term, you're probably just going to damage your reputation anyway. But, there is a lot of tension in the community around review bombing a game and whether that's okay because it uses AI art. And, AI art as a thing, we can talk about as well, but just quickly on the topic of review bombing, I saw this discussion come up a few times in several board game forums, not just on BGG, but on social media as well. And there is clearly a sort of a divide on the subject matter, but then a lot of people were talking also about how like you shouldn't be using the BGG ratings to do something like this. And I just think that that's a very slippery slope, right? Like once you start creating all these guidelines around what people can and can't put in their review of a game, then you start telling people, what their opinions should be and how they should feel. And that becomes problematic, and I do think like there's this case, right, where a bunch of people are posting tens and ones on a game that's not even in print and doesn't even have a public rule book yet, just over AI art, which is very clearly not really about this game at all, but about the greater context of should AI art be in games? Or should it be used for artistic purposes, and what is the use of it? And this, could apply to literally anything. It doesn't need to be board games, but it's clearly a very hot button topic. But, there was this case, Barry, I don't know if you were aware of this, earlier, where people were review bombing the Mass Effect adventure game because it had pronouns on the character sheets.
Vaguely recall. I mean, it's far from the first time review bombings happen, whether even on Board Game Geek, but, broadly, anytime somebody disagrees with something for whatever reason, and they're able to rate it, whether that's on IMDb, whether that's a weird Amazon product review.
Yeah.
People tend to go for the extremes, but I do vaguely recall the Mass Effect.
Yeah, so the reason I bring that up is just because a lot of BGG users got banned for doing that,
If you're just looking at why it's okay to ban them on Board Game Geek, well, Board Game Geek's policies already, don't allow for discrimination, which is what those reviews are based on. They don't allow AI-generated art. So actually all the art in Foxpaw is being removed, which is why if you went to the hotness just now, there's no image on the hotness for it.
Hmm.
the images that are credited as Mid Journey in the image section of the page are being removed. Um, it's just policy, and so whenever you're using somebody else's platform, you have to go with their policies. So
Right. So is this case? Yeah, I mean, and that's fair enough. You do have to abide by the policy of the platform, and in the case of the pronouns, I think that's about extending inclusivity, right? It's about showing a conscientiousness for sort of positive societal development, and I suppose if you don't find that a positive development, you're entitled to that opinion, but I really hope that you'll reflect on it thoughtfully. And as with all opinions, it is everyone's got freedom of speech. We believe in that. You're entitled to your opinion, but just because you're entitled to your opinion does not mean you're exempt from cultural accountability, which for your own opinions, and if you hold, that's why we have the term hill that I'll die on, right? That is where you hold an opinion that nobody else agrees with, but you refuse to give it up. And when it's fun, it's fun. And when it's not, it's time to think about your life choices. So, in the context of AI art, it's not really about cultural development or anything in the same way. It's not free. It's generated by platforms owned by very large corporations who have made those platforms off of the back of, millions of artworks that have been uploaded to the internet. And the morality of that is, big and complex and still under review, but probably never really going to be fairly dealt with, whatever you think the fairness is. We can talk about that. I've heard lots of arguments on both sides of that, but, I think also there is this kind of idea that AI art is going to replace artists. And I hope, it is my sincere hope, that it doesn't and actually just becomes a useful tool for artists to create more and better art. But, it doesn't seem to be, that doesn't seem to be necessarily reconciliatory with the idea of these big corporations with profit motives creating platforms to generate profit, right? If you can make it more efficient by cutting out artists and just having AI generate everything, then it's hard to see an argument why a profit-driven company wouldn't want to do that. Unless, it just consistently looked as weird as it does at the moment, which might be one of the reasons why people don't actually like it, because it doesn't look great, that might be my subjective opinion. It certainly is, but I find it can be quite inconsistent. It looks like there's sort of often weird shading or weird lighting, or it's too detailed, but I would prefer an artist's touch, and I'd prefer a sort of a human to do art on it. And with that in mind, if you decide to incorporate AI art into your board game, then unless you actually think it looks better, like genuinely think it looks way better than a real human artist, you're doing that to save money, or you're doing it to make one artist much more productive. In which case, it's not as big a problem in my mind if you've still got one artist who's generating art in their style and then tweaking it. I guess that's probably okay if it comes out looking really good. But then it's like you're making all these savings, or you're able to produce a lot more content, so it should manifest. What I'm trying to say is it should manifest as benefits being passed back to the people supporting your product, and that is, again, up to the judicious eye of the consumer to look at the product and go, okay, this has used AI art, at least in part, to generate this content. So what am I getting out of that? Is it significantly cheaper? Is it got a lot more content in it? Where is the benefit for the consumer? Otherwise, it's just to increase profits. In which case, I'd rather you put the money into hiring actual human artists and making the art better, you know. But
Well, I think you're going to get some contradictory views on that. Even Wise Wizard, the guys behind Star Realms, they're new. They've delved into AI art in their newest game, which is Dragon something or other. But I can maybe find out. They are
is this
using
White Wizard Games?
Their new game Draconis 8, another card game. They've heavily used AI, and they've done the same thing where they had the artist and they said, well, our artist was now able to produce 320 different works of art in the same time they would have been able to do 15, that kind of thing. But you look at it and it's still AI art. But when it gets to the point where it's indistinguishable, when it has a style that isn't easy to notice, when you start looking for it, then where does that leave artists? Then you've got prompt engineers, and is that who you want visualizing stuff as well there? But in fact, I'm even just looking at the Blue Dragon playmat for Draconis 8. The dragon on its right hand has 4 fingers, and on its left hand has 5 fingers. And you're just like, who's approving this? Right? You've got an artist who could fix this, and they still choose not to.
I'm just looking at it, and I think actually it does look like they're both 4. But on the left hand, it looks like it's got a pinky instead of a thumb.
I've zoomed in a little bit.
So like on the right hand, you can see it's got 3 fingers and a thumb. And on the left hand, it's got 3 fingers, but it looks like it's got 4 fingers, but it looks like there's a extra pinky and no thumb.
No thumb,
Yeah.
So again, and it just wouldn't end up looking like that if you were.
Also, the spines on the forearm go up past the elbow on the left, and they don't go past the elbow on the right.
You don't know how Dragon's about. He's very sensitive about that.
He's very sensitive about his forearm spines.
But at the moment, there's so much to this topic. The view tends to be within much of the current sort of artist community or digital artist community that there is no ethical way to use generative AI in this sense, because laws have been built on stolen work.
Yeah, and I'm very sympathetic to that argument.
I think it's fine to use placeholder to get an idea across, but even what I've seen some of is that people would use generative AI to create a bit of art and then they would redraw it, but even that's not accepted by.
Well, it doesn't get around this issue that the generative art is, and you could. So it doesn't get around this issue that the generative art is coming from stolen art, which I have used inverted commas if you're watching the video thing, but actually, I very much think it is stolen art. But where you get into this issue of if somebody was tracing another artist's drawing, we might not be so angry about that. But I think that's because, in part, at least, there is a sense of accountability, right? Like if someone had traced over someone else's drawing, they wouldn't just, there is a degree of sort of distance you can get by using generative AI from a direct ripoff that you just can't get without it, right? And that protection is, where accountability dies, and that's the problem, right? There's also, this idea that if somebody is, another artist who's copying your work, it's, if I'm an artist and somebody else is inspired by my work and they're tracing it or whatever, I'm not going to turn around and be like, hey, I mean, and this is different. This is personal, right? But I come from this mindset that, a rising tide raises all boats, and that kind of stuff. But, it's at least there's someone there to hold accountable if it's, really, if it's really costing you financially. But, at the end of the day, I'd be flattered probably that someone was going through going through the process of copying my art or trying to learn to do art based on stuff that I'd done. But there's also like a sort of a degree of human connection there. Whereas what we're talking about here are people that you don't know, who you'll never know, stealing it via a giant corporation who owns this product, and it's just an entirely different thing, and if you can't understand the difference, then, I think that's you're being deliberately obtuse then.
There is still a lot to say, but I don't think, even if we spent the next couple hours talking about it.
The last point I'd just make, is that, and this is, probably the last point I'd just make is that you remember, so I know Tristan Hall from Hall or Nothing Games personally, so, take this for what you will. But I remember I didn't know Tristan when he kickstarted Gloom of Killforth in 2017, actually in 2016. He came out in 2017. And that was a fantasy adventure game that had unique art on every card. And I remember when I got that game, which I bought because, I just bought it on a whim, actually. And it's got unique art on every card. And Tristan went out and found all those artists and hired them all and produced all. And he did everything for that game. All the design, coordinated all the artists, everything all by himself, to get that game made. And, the art itself, I like it. It's very specific. It's very particular. You can also tell where it's different artists have been involved and stuff like that. But overall, I thought the art was one of the big sort of selling points of that game. And so I don't really see I don't see a cost benefit argument that benefits the consumer here, right? Like if Tristan could do it all by himself and run that Kickstarter and found a company off of that, all by himself, then surely a bigger company with more people involved can find artists and coordinate them and pay them effectively,
Yeah. Makes sense enough. I think, in terms of scale, I don't know. In any board game, I think art's or can be the biggest cost.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, but
But over the course of, say, a print run of 5,000, how much is each individual consumer saving?
You mean from the AI art?
Like if you're looking, one of your potential arguments or paths to go down was, what does it save you as a consumer when artists are not being paid? Probably not that much. And you probably would pay the extra $2.
Right. You mean as an individual, it wouldn't cost you that much extra. I mean, I think that can really depend. I'm sure different artists have different costs. Much like actors in film, things like that. But yeah, I think, if you give the consumer the choice, they'll always pick a real artist, or at least the vast majority would, unless you made an incredibly compelling cost-saving argument. And even then, I don't know if a business would actually do that or want to do that, because from what I'm just saying, from what I've seen of AI art in board games, it doesn't look like there are big cost savings being passed back to the consumer anyway. It's not like all of the games with AI art are just way cheaper, or that the art is way better. It's like I'm looking at this Dragonate thing that you've mentioned here. And the art is really, really, really detailed. Like we said, it's missed a few things, which is not great. And maybe that's the problem with having one artist doing all of this AI art. They don't have time to fix the dragon's hands, but, yeah, it's still, I'm not sure if more detail or intensely detailed is necessarily better. But maybe once artists get more used to collaborating with AI, they'll start to be able to do a much wider scope of art. But like I said, that I think that it's really about. I mean, hopefully this becoming a tool to benefit artists, but I'm not sure if I'm confident that that's going to be the case, which is upsetting and probably why this is such a provocative topic for so many people. Anyway, enough of that.
Well, just to, if anybody's interested in kind of what goes into the art in a board game, there's a great artist diary up on Board Game Geek from the illustrator of Far Away, Maxime Morin, and she talks about say Maxime, I don't know, could be a guy's name. Talks about all the iterations that go into it, all the changes, what they try to do for the feel, and just all the stuff that you don't get with AI art. And it's this great look at proper art, rather than just writing a couple of sentences to see what happens.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Far Away, it's not a game I know anything about, actually, but it was a game I was familiar with when you brought the article to my attention, just because the art on the box is really appealing. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I remember seeing that. It's distinctive, and there's the name and the art is evocative, It's a whole package, It's like there's just something enticing about Far Away and the art that makes me want to learn more.
It's well cool.
Okay, well, let's leave. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on this, feel free to email me. I can't promise I'll respond to all your emails, but I'll definitely read them all, and I'll do a bit more thinking. And if I think of anything more to say, maybe we'll talk about it again in the future. But this is obviously an ongoing thing, and it's always developing. And at the end of the day, if you have a really strong opinion on it, the best thing you can do is, rather than go on to, I mean, you can always review Bomb on BGG, that's your right. And, I think for what it's worth, the people who are putting ones on there because they dislike AI art is a lot more genuine than the people who are putting tens on there to counterbalance it because, they don't actually really have an opinion unless their opinion is AI art be better than real people. So the AR is so good, I always want to play this game. But, I just mean that I can see the position, this AI art puts me off this game so much I never want to play it, as a much more genuine position than the AR is so good I really always want to play it. But the best thing you can do is vote with your wallets. So if this is a really big deal for you, then just, keep your money for games that, use actual artists and actual writers and all that good stuff. Right. Barry, what have you been playing?
Well, touching on one of the publishers that we just mentioned there, actually, Wise Wizard, and I mentioned that were the creators of Star Realms. I have been playing a little bit of the Star Trek version of Star Realms.
I didn't know this was a thing.
It's a genuine thing.
Wow.
In fact, you know what? I'll even talk a little bit about the art within the game. But
is it AI?
It's not AI. It's worse.
Oh, is it screen grabs?
It's screen grabs.
Screen grabs are bad, but you know what? I'll take them over AI.
Yeah. So this is a re-implementation of Star Realms, very popular deck building game. It has a river-style market. There are 4 factions, and it's not super unique, but like the core loop of the gameplay is having, generally, if you have 2 cards of the same faction in play on a turn, you'll get the bonus benefit on the bottom half of the card. Otherwise, you just get the top half of the card. There is very little changes between Star Realms proper and the Star Trek Star Realms. The colours are slightly different. The factions are slightly different. It's not blobs, it's Romulans. It's not Federation, it's Federation. Wait a minute. And so actually I think the 4 factions are the Federation, the Romulans, the Klingons, and the... Who's yellow?
The Federation, the Romulans, the Klingons, the Vulcans?
No, I don't think it is Vulcans. I think it's somebody.
Oh, it's got a
Oh,
Ferengi.
Dominion. No, it's Dominion.
I said the Dominion. Well, you go
But
Dominion before you
Dominion's
go Ferengi or something.
well, there's a Ferengi ship is like your base one that you can always buy.
Right.
The trade ship.
Fair enough.
And the
You go Dominion before you go Borg. What?
I know you got to assume there's some expansions somewhere out there. But this is, as far as I can tell, I can't really remember what ships are in base Star Realms or not. It's pretty much 1-to-1. But I enjoy Star Realms. I moved away from Star Realms to Shards of Infinity for my River Market.
Yeah, likewise.
Games.
That's interesting.
But this was a good theme for the person that I bought it for, and we played a few games. I'm currently losing in our matches. There's not much in it. A couple of wins, and I'll be right back there. But yes, the art on it is the various screen grabs that whoever at Paramount's let them use. And so, worse than being homogeneously generated is a lot of them are blurry because they've had to zoom in real close on that ship from something that was never meant to be looked at other than a passing couple of frames on the screen. And other arts or other ships are fine, sort of high definition from the movies, those kind of things. So it's actually a little jarring at times if you were to look into it. Luckily, Star Realms is a fairly mechanical game. There's not a huge amount of theme to be taken from it. Particularly, the person I was playing with mentioned you're effectively fighting, even though it talks about authority, which the original Star Realms also talked about for your hit points, realistically, you're attacking. What might have been a different or interesting direction for the game to go was more the diplomatic nature of Star Trek and making connections or whatever and building up authority within various sectors. But that would have required the creation of a slightly different game. Or they could have just at least not called it attack and instead did diplomacy points or something, and you're whittling down the opponent's diplomacy. But that was the only thematic disjoint from what is already a fairly unthematic game. But yeah, if you like Star Realms and you like Star Trek, no brainer.
But it is the exact same game rethemed.
I don't know if every card's identical because the cards swing so wildly anyway, but I do think they are very, very similar from what I remember. Like, so the Klingons that the sort of one coster as you play, you can scrap a card from your hand or discard pile, and you get 2 attack if you've got another Klingon ship in play. I'm pretty sure is identical to the scrapper in Star Realms. And the blob ships, which are Romulans, there's certainly the same big mothership 8 coster in there. I can't say definitively that every card is the same. I think it is. The red ship, so the Klingon ship that lets you copy any other ship that you've played that turn, like they're all things that are in base Star Realms. And so I think it is just, there may be some tweaks, there may be some balancing. That's an odd thing to say about Star Realms. There's definitely not a lot of balancing going on. But there may be some differences between, say, Star Realms and the colonies, other base set Star Realms. They've maybe incorporated some cards between the two. I don't know 100%, but it is identical. If you can play Star Realms, you can play Star Realms Star Trek, and I don't think it's different enough to.
How much Star Realms did you play?
I played a lot of Star Realms. I had everything up until their last foil Kickstarter nonsense.
Because I was just thinking, like, because I didn't play that much. I played the base game and then maybe a few expansion sets. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. It's fine, but the sort of revolving marketplace deck builders I find quite frustrating.
The what was I going to say? Oh, the booster pack expansion model was good for me. You're buying something in the shop, I'll just get that booster. Yeah. And then by the time you've done that 20 times, you're like, wait a minute.
I've got all this stuff. Well, and that's sort of what I was getting at. As someone who played then very played a lot of big Star Realms. Is Star Trek Star Realms, does it feel a bit like going back to basics?
Yes, but I don't feel like Star Realms ever overly evolved from basics.
Mm.
Sure, you had missions and heroes and the solo mode where or co-op mode where you're taking down a big ship. They've added lots of bells and whistles, but the core part of the game is the same. I also played a lot of Hero Realms. Played a lot of Ascension. I've played a lot of Shards of Infinity now. In fact, that's delivering for people as we speak this week.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, did you back it?
No, I didn't know there was more stuff.
Oh, there's more stuff. I would have backed it, even though I already own everything, if they didn't ship it in a tin.
What's wrong with that?
I don't want it. A tin. Where am I going to... I'm not putting that on my shelf. Sushi Go Party's already doing my head in. Somebody needs to make a proper box for Sushi Go Party.
There's one of those weird hills to die on.
Yeah, there you go.
I have
games.
So is there new content?
And yes, there is, and there's no way of getting it without backing Kickstarter.
Oh, boo. Well, I've got enough Shards of Infinity. I don't feel like I've exhausted everything I've got. I've got, I suppose, everything that came to retail up to this point. And it doesn't get to the table often enough that I'm like dying for more content, but. I think, it's a great little game, and I've derailed Star Trek Star Realms by talking about the deck builder I prefer.
No, same, like, I'd rather play, Shards of Infinity as well.
And I love Star Trek.
Don't they have a new, isn't there a Shards of Infinity, like, the Ascension Tactics thing? I'm sure there's, like, another game coming out in that world. But anyway, I don't know either. Anyway, it was good. If you like Star Realms and you like Star Trek, get it. If you like Star Trek and you don't have any games, get it. If you're fine with quick, like the games are super fast as well, so you can play 3-4 in an hour, not much bother, particularly by the time everybody knows the cards. So top fun, great present, great idea from me.
Well done, Barry. Good job. Well, I'll talk about a game that is ironically called AI, 100% Human.
Oh, come on, we just talked about this for half an hour.
Doesn't use any AI art. Doesn't actually really use any art at all. This is a tableau building card game. It is published by Explorate, and the artist is Vidu, although in this case mostly a graphic designer. And it is designed by Peric Librelesso and Renard Librelesso. And I presume it is French. I think Explorate are French. And what you're doing in this is it's like a sub 60-minute tableau builder where you're functionally building a grid of 3x5, so 15 cards, 3 rows of 5 cards. And you're drafting, so it wants to be 3. There's a 2-player variant and a solo variant. I haven't done the solo, I've done the 2-player, and I've played the 3-player game as well. And the complexity is 2.6, which I guess puts it about wingspan weight, which feels about right. It's much quicker, it's much shorter. The learning curve is way less than wingspan, but actually the sort of brain-hurty calculations are probably greater. And much like original Race for the Galaxy, you're going to have a whole host of hieroglyphs to internalize. It's not too bad, the hieroglyphics, actually. There's quite a lot of them printed on the cards that form your player board. You're given 3 cards, and all they're doing is signifying where your 3 rows are going to go. There are also player mats, but they're an actual expansion barrier. I'll talk about that in a minute. But what you're doing is 2 rounds, and then the game ends. Each round, you get 7 cards in hand, and you've got in your hand what's called your reserve, which is a set of it's a bank of 3 cards, but you'll probably mostly have 2 cards in it because you draft 1 card into the reserve, which will put your reserve total to 3 because you start with 2 in there, and then you play a card from the reserve, and this is all simultaneous. So everyone drafts one to the reserve and plays one from the reserve. Doesn't have to be the one they drafted this turn. And then you pass the remaining cards around the table. And every time you flip a card face up in the tableau, it will have some scoring mechanism that will fire off. So it is effectively a tableau builder, which is largely geometric, which is looking at what you've put down and where you've put it, and then firing off some scoring mechanism based on what you've done. And the cards themselves have all manner of elements going on. They're different colors. Thematically, what you're doing, I think, is programming an AI's mind, and the cards represent data that represent human skills. So, for example, all the blue cards are social skills, and all the red cards are artistic skills and things like that. The theme is very much not super integrated into the mechanisms, I guess, unless programming an AI is a lot like building a tableau and maximizing scoring points. But the cards have different colors, and they've got numbers on them. And, they're going to look at how many different colors are in the row, or, how much do the corners add up, or do 4 different colors touch on the corner, and things like that. So you're just you're managing all these different geometrical puzzles to try and maximize your scoring. And every time you flip a card face up, you get points. And then there's an end game. There's two rounds of the game, right? So like once everyone's drafted the 7 cards, then there's a card that scores points for the end of that round. Then you do the whole thing again, and there's a round 2 scoring card as well. And those are set up face up at the beginning of the game, so you're kind of building towards them. And of course, the round 2 scoring card is also going to be end game scoring. And everyone starts with 1 card in the center of the tableau. So you do 7 cards in each round, and then the 15th card in your tableau was the one you started with face up, which is also an end game scoring condition that you're supposed to be building towards during the game. Anyway, when I first played it with 3 players, I was kind of like, this is just okay. I can kind of see the appeal, but it's very dry. And it's, one of those games that's sort of simultaneous, kind of heads down puzzly. There is room for hate drafting, certainly. Particularly with the reserve, although I suspect you'll probably want to use that more for holding on to cards that are going to help you in the future rather than just trying to draft away cards that are going to benefit your opponents. But there might be situations where you're like, well, there's a couple of cards here that are worth 3 points to me, but are they worth more points to one of my opponents? Something like that. And then I played it the 2-player version, which is basically the exact same thing, except the hands cycle cards out round to round as well. So there's actually just new random cards entering the draft. But actually that kind of worked quite well because it meant you could hate draft a card away. So you're like, okay, I'm cycling this card out. And you have to do that after you've drafted one for yourself. So you draft one for yourself and then cycle a card out. So that actually created more player interaction. So I might have even liked it more at 2 than at higher counts. But I thought it was strong. Like it's pretty good. It's short enough that it's just kind of a fun filler puzzle, and it's quite quick to get into. And I was surprised how quickly everyone picked up the iconography, albeit they're all veteran gamers. If they were not, it might be more obtuse. But yeah, not bad. If you like tableau builders, if you like tableau builders that are focused on the layout of the cards within the tableau and their relation to one another, then this will probably be right up your street, albeit it's very light and accessible. So if you're looking for a more complex thing, this is not it. If you wanted Earth, but it plays faster than Earth, this might scratch that itch. If you hated Earth, you're going to hate this. That's about all I have to say on AI 100% Human. Oh yeah, and then it came with player board expansion, which was these neoprene mats that have extra triggered abilities printed on them in certain spots. So when you place a card somewhere in the tableau and flip it up, it will also trigger the effect underneath it. So that's technically an expansion.
Cool. Just so I understand fully, I get the game, laying them out, and then the iconography of a card might be score 2 points for every different coloured card in this row.
Yep.
Right? But how do you trigger that scoring, sorry?
When the card is flipped face up, it fires off immediately.
So immediately it fires.
Yeah.
Fine.
I mean, everyone flips the cards at the same time. It's all simultaneous.
Yeah, okay, right, I'm with you. So you're drafting cards into
Yeah.
a pool that you can then choose from, and then you choose when to play it and where to play it.
Yeah, but you're all going to be playing a card face down and then flipping it face up. So the cards that the other players play might also impact your card. For example, if it's, you've got these hacker cards, which are the black cards that might copy a yellow card in an opponent's tableau. And you can copy a yellow card they played previously, or even one they just played this round. Or this hand or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's, it's super fast because everything's simultaneous.
Nope, sounds good. Don't know what I thought that game was. I'll tell you what I thought that game was, maybe. I thought it was Human Punishment.
Oh, very different game.
Yeah. Human Punishment being from Godot Games.
Is it really?
I think it's, yeah, I think it might be.
Huh. I think you might be right, actually.
That and Amongst Cultists, right? Human Punishment. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Funny how things loop around.
Anyway, AI 100% human, didn't do anything new enough to set my world on fire. I'm not, dead keen to play it a lot more because, it's a fairly simple game. But it's pleasant. I'm happy to play it. I thought it worked well at 2, which was a pleasant surprise. I've almost no interest in playing it solo, but it does go up to 6, and at 6 it would probably be reasonably the same length as it was at 3 or 4 or 5. So, it's always nice to have something that's sort of, gonna at least not offend anyone that works at those counts.
Yep. No, I think it sounds pretty decent. I'd like to give it a go.
Yeah, I think you'd probably
like
quite
the kind of game I'd like to bust out just on a sort of filler type deal.
Yeah, exactly right. It definitely fills that niche. For those of you out there as well, I picked up the Kickstarter edition at Essen. You don't need it. Don't worry about it. Just get the basic version. It comes with all these really silly Kickstarter bling things that are not even that good. Don't worry about it. The only thing it came with, actually, in the Kickstarter edition that I did appreciate were these card-sized neoprene mats in all the different player colors, and their only purpose is to sit next to you, and you put the hand on it when you're ready to pass it, so people can see that you've put the hand down to pick up. Which actually I thought was really helpful because it's quite common in drafting games for people to be like, drafting too quickly or to lose track of the hand when they put it down and whatnot. So that was actually helpful. But
4 hands behind. Speaking of fillers, this is a small game from Cocktail Games and designed by Kaya Miyano. And that is Trio. Now, I know a lot of people talking about this before, but and I've played it a little bit, but I managed to get a sort of evening of fun time games in, and Trio was amongst them, and it was a very good time. Have we talked about Trio before in the podcast?
I don't think so.
No, so the Trio is a Go Fish style game. So Go Fish, where you have certain cards in your hand, you want to complete the set, and you're asking other players whether they have the cards that you want. So there's only 3 of each number, 1 through 12 in the game. Plays from 3 to 6, and you'll get dealt a certain number of cards based on player count, and the rest of the cards go into the middle. And what you're trying to do is score a trio of all 3 of the same number. Now, the way that it works is the bit that makes the game function and is clever is that you have to sort your hand numerically, left to right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And the cards in the middle, you don't know what they are initially. But on your turn, you're going to ask a player, including yourself, one of 2 questions. What is your highest card? Which they must reveal. What is your lowest card? Which they must reveal. or you could flip a card in the middle. And you will flip cards until you flip a non-matching card. So if I were to ask you, what is your lowest card? And you revealed a 1. And I was to ask myself, what is my lowest card? And I revealed a 1. Then I would just have to find that last remaining 1 to make the trio and claim the trick. And to claim the cards. So that could be in the middle, or it could also be in my hand, or it could also still be in your hand, or any other player's hand. So it's a memory game where you're trying to remember, well, what was your lowest card again? What was your highest card? And I will say that this probably works best since we were most of the way through a keg of beer. And so everybody kept forgetting who'd revealed what and where things were. But that, functionally that is the game. If you play the more, I get it. It doesn't sound amazing. It is a lot of fun. The basic version of the game, you've got to get 3 of these trios. A trio of trios, if you will. The spicy version of the game is that you need to get matching trios. So every trio has a matching 1 or 2 other numbers that it wants you to find to pair up to win. But in both cases, if you make a trio of the 7s, so that number is obviously in the middle of everybody's hand when you start, it's very hard to get to the 7s, then you will automatically win. So you either need to, for the advanced version of the game, get a matching pair of trios or the 7s. And we had a great game where we knew where all 3 of the 7s were, and David goes to Sam, what's your highest card? 7. He goes to me, what's your highest card? 7. And we knew the 7 was one of the 4 remaining cards in the middle, and I'd just revealed it like 2 turns before. And he went to pick it up. Oh no, wait, I'm telling you lies. He had the other 7, and he went to pick it up, and I went to discard a card from my hand, and he was like, oh wait, did you have the 7? And I goes, no. And then he goes, what's your highest card? And I flipped over an 8. And then it was my go. I did all 3 7s. It was brilliant. But yes, it probably works a little better if there's some impairment to one's memory rather than playing a perfect game every time. But it was a good laugh.
That sounds like the inverse of a game of That's Not a Hat I played while we were quite drunk. Have you played it?
No. But, I know you've got to remember the cards where people, yeah, you've
got to. It's a really sort of simple memory game, and I really actually enjoy it very much because it's very stupid, but it's probably the opposite to what you're describing because we were a bit drunk when we played it and nobody could remember anything, and the game ended so fast because it's sort of like first to lose 3 cards or something. And right. Nobody could remember what anything was, so they were constantly lying about what everything was and getting called out.
Yeah. Like, normally I'm not a big fan of memory in games. Like, if it's something that was public information, I feel like it should, to some degree, remain public information. But in a game that's as short as this and as inconsequential, I don't mind that, there's a degree of memory. Particularly when you get into the higher player counts, you can't quite remember who revealed what by the time it comes back around to your go.
So I actually do really like memory games, despite the fact I'm not very good at them. And I'm also a big advocate for actually memory as a game mechanism. I think it's a really interesting thing to play with. I mean, I can understand why if something's public information, then it should. I mean, if it's intended to be public information to make the game more competitive or whatever, then, that's the way it needs to be. That's the way it needs to be. It should be public information. But if something's like, I think where you get into the gray zone, right, is when something was public once, is no longer visible, but therefore, if it could be remembered, it should be then made known to people. I'm thinking about people who like to write everything down, and that's where you start to lose me, right? If you're taking notes on all of the information that's passing by, then you might win the game, but I'm probably not going to play with you again.
Yeah. And it kind of goes, I mean, is it a skill that should be tested? And a lot of games, because you could have somebody with, somebody with perfect recollection, an eidetic memory, and they got somebody in the middle who's pretty good at remembering stuff, but can forget things. And you got the person at the other end of the scale who's terrible at remembering things. And then when you get to the bottom, somebody that's so bad at remembering things, they've asked you to make allowances for them to write things down. At which point they loop back round to the the guy at the top with the perfect memory, and neither one. The advantage you get from having certain skills, I just don't think memory is one that I like to have tested. Of all the skills to have, your strategy, your tactics, your bluffing, those are all things I feel are a fun thing to test in a game, whereas I feel like memory, as you say, when it was at some point public, and it's just a case of recalling. Most of the time, I don't like it. Sometimes it's okay, and I'm not talking about if I pull a card from your hand to look at it, put it back. I don't need to know where it is in your hand in case there's an additional advantage in seeing when that's been played face down or whatever. If that can be shuffled back up, fine. I just need to know that you had that card at some point.
Well, I just think when I think about moments of sort of excitement and tension, they quite often come from these kind of human errors. Like, oh, I could make this call perfectly if I could just remember that card you played 2 turns ago,
Yeah.
And I think if you're just writing everything down and it becomes incredibly calculational, then you undermine a lot of those exciting moments, like ultimately games are won and lost by human error. And the more we do to eliminate it, I think the less exciting the games become.
Potentially. I also think there's a luck skill balance, which some of the best games have to straddle, and where an experienced player would have no problem remembering which cards are played, a newer player is still working to internalize what those cards were.
Sure. I mean, we're getting there into a discussion about player skill levels, right? Because, of course, also the tensest games are games that are played by 2 incredibly skilled opponents of equal level, and you can't really account for. That's not something you can easily resolve. Inherently, the more a game accounts for variable skill levels, the less skillful the game becomes.
Or the more it seeks to normalize those abilities, yeah.
Well, yeah, the most balanced game in the world is, chuck a die and get a higher number. It works at any skill level.
Yeah, okay, fair. Anyway, none of that is Trio. Trio is fun.
Trio is a fun memory game.
It's a deduction game, a bluffing game. You got to remember. You got to think, well, your last highest card was a 9, so I'm thinking that your next highest card's probably an 8 because I've not seen any other ones. Those kind of things. So there's other elements to it. I put it in the same bracket as Papa U, which is another game that comes in a tin.
Gosh darn tins.
Yeah.
Well, I thought I'd do the Patreons a service here and talk about D.E.I. because this came up on the Patreon Discord recently. They said, should we buy D.E.I? And I said, because we quite like D.E.I, don't we, Barry?
I do.
I've been playing it recently. I actually played it quite recently with someone who knew how to pronounce divide et impera with proper Latin. And I've forgotten how they pronounced it, so apologies. You know who you are.
Divide et impera. Arrivederci.
But the game is 2022, Kickstarter from Ludus Magnus Studios. It plays 2 to 4 or up to 6 with expansions. It's 60 to 90 minutes if you're super across the base game and only playing that. It's longer if you're not. Its complexity is a 3.17 out of 5 on BGG, which I'd suggest is fairly accurate. It's not an especially complex game. It might even be a little lower than that. That's probably boosted a little by the less than handholdy rulebook. It's designed by Tommaso Battista, and the artists are Ferdinand Amarantano, Simone De Paolis, Tommaso Incecci, and Giovanni Pirota. And so this is a big box that Barry and I have. We both have the all-in Kickstarter and now the big box edition. I finally decanted all of my boxes into the big box.
How'd you get on with the tiles?
The tiles I actually didn't have a problem with. The same problem you had. I managed to fit them all into the slots, albeit one section was quite snug. What I did discover was that I don't have enough of the card sleeves, and it's impossible to fix.
Yeah.
The good news is it doesn't really matter because the cards, what matters is that you have the sleeves for the cards that go into the market, because they're the ones that are actually shuffled and randomized. The cards in your hand are never shuffled and never randomized, so you can, I guess, put the starter cards in whatever sleeves you find, and use your fancy printed sleeves for just the marketplace cards. And I think there should be enough. Having said that, I didn't buy any more of the branded sleeves because I never buy them. I always just use your bog standard sleeves, clear sleeves from whatever company I like to use. It's fine. But in this case, I guess they'd come with the all-in, so I decided to use them and then forgot. So when I got the new expansion, I didn't have sleeves for that. And they're not probably ever going to reprint them, so that's a pain. But that is a minor first world problem in the grand scheme of things. But what I did do, because we've played now, so this game has become kind of like a favorite of the patrons to play on asynchronous play with me. So we'll play it on asynchronous and just take, a turn every now and then. And I think it actually works quite well for that. Some games, like you were saying, Distilled, don't really work great in that format.
Yeah.
I thought actually, because of the structure of D.E.I, like, you play 2 cards and do a turn, there's actually a reasonable amount of stuff you can do asynchronously, and then it actually works pretty well in that format. But the base game on BGA, where we've been playing it, only comes in fully randomized, and the suggested starter setup for the map tiles, and it only has the 4 basic gangs in it, and that's about it. So having played it a bunch, I've sort of 2 takeaways. The first takeaway is that, and I've played the base game a lot more than just on BGA. I've played the base game quite a lot, so I was dead keen when I got a chance to play it last week to bring expansion content to the table. And more on that later, because that's kind of where this is building to. What happens if you start throwing in a lot of expansion content? But what I have observed is that I do think Abraham, the orange gang leader, and the black gang leader, the giant ogre guy, is that the black gang or the white gang? I think it's the white gang, actually.
There's a white gang if you're talking the guy that counts as 3.
Yeah. Those 2 are like way stronger than the other 2. Like, I think Abraham's actually the best, but also Abraham's drone is just way better than the other drones. Like, I think Simon is the next best drone. Simon is the one that just moves around and recruits two gang members. But Abraham has the harvester, which just collects more stuff. And then Abraham also gets to do a free collect action whenever you use a collect action. It's bonkers. It's so good. I really think that's like heads and shoulders above the other powers in the base game. So yeah, those original base factions, not the best balanced. I do know that some of the content is different gang leaders for the base game gangs. If you don't know anything about the game, by the way, it is, I'll just summarize very, very quickly. It is sort of area control in that effectively it's just an above ground map divided into different sections, some of which are harder to access than others. And you're moving your gang around these areas. You're not actually fighting with any of the other gangs, but what you're trying to do really is control certain areas at certain times to maximize scoring and also collect resources from the areas. And the catch is that you can only move into different areas of the map if you have the majority of space at the end of the move action. So, sorry, the majority of people in the area at the end of the move action. So as more gangers appear on the board, it becomes more difficult to move around. And then also, in order to collect the resources from those areas, you have to have the most gang members there as well. So there's a sort of element of area majority that's quite important, because all those resources are used to upgrade your hand of cards. And it's an action selection game where you're selecting actions from your hand of cards, and you can upgrade those as the game goes on using the resources that you're picking up from the board. And you generally want to do this because every card you buy is worth points, and it's generally worth more points than the resource cost that it has, because resources are points at the end as well. And, there's various other scoring mechanisms that are giving you different objectives to do round to round, things like that. So what the expansions do is add different kinds of map layouts, more complex map layouts, and tons of different gangs that all have different powers and various levels of asymmetry. And so when I sat down to play the last week, we played 5 players, which is, above the core set player count of 4. It goes up to 6 with the expansions. And we took, I was playing as Anarchy, which is from the brand new expansion they just shipped. And the only base game faction we actually had in the game was Abraham, which was chosen at random by someone who didn't know anything about the game. So the orange pick up everything gang. We also had Shop, which is an expansion gang. And what Shop does is they add a drone who is a shop. So you can buy cards from this drone. It's got cards in it. They're very, very good. But you have to have majority in the zone where the drone is. And of course, it can be moved around. You've got... And Shop has been FAQ'd, by the way, because the drone ability... which is not the shop part, it just happens to be a shop, but it's got a drone ability where when it ends up, it moves, and then when it lands in a territory, what it does is it lets you swap a card on your board with a card on a player in that region's board, and it's just so annoying that they fact it, so now you just copy an action card from their board instead of trading for it, which is probably a good thing. It did have to be bought cards, so you couldn't trade starter cards for bought cards, but it's still not very cool. We also played with, I can't remember what they're called. I'm going to call them the Psychics, which are these genetically... Psionics, that's it, yeah. So instead of having a whole gang of people, you just have 5, and they all have special powers and do all kinds of bonkers stuff. They all have their own private scoring objectives, and it looked very complex, and I'm quite glad I didn't have to play as them. And then someone else was Gaia, which is this faction of mythical creatures that are, again, asymmetrical. They have lots of people, but they summon them in different ways. They have a sort of a funky castle that moves around the board. And again, their main thing is that they don't engage with the purchasing of cards. So instead, they upgrade their hand to... What they do actually is the game has a series of outposts that function as objectives you want to control at certain points. And Gaia wants to control these objectives in order to consume them. If it controls enough of them, it can consume one, and then it gets to upgrade one of the cards in its hand to a much better card that only it can access. So that's quite interesting. It's also got funky ways of moving around by building effectively tunnels across the map. But what this kind of ended up doing was adding a lot of downtime, and the asymmetrical missions of Gaia and Psionics made it really hard to follow what those factions were actually trying to do. So what player interaction there was in trying to thwart people was confined to the 3 players who were actually trying to do the same things. So I was hoping... What I was concerned about really is that the base game doesn't have enough replayability in it. I'm not sure that the expansion's variety massively improves that. But you've played with some of the expansions. What was your experience?
Yeah, so I've not played the new one, the Faith and Anarchy, and I've not played any of the solo stuff.
No, nor have I.
Doesn't seem like the kind of game you'd want to be playing solo. I'm sure it might be fine, but I'm not giving it a go. But I have played, you mentioned the Camdens, the faction with the shop.
Yeah.
Played with them. I very much enjoyed them. Might have helped that I think I won that game by a point in the end. But thought I added a little something. The Rads, some people say that faction's quite strong, so they're they lose guys every round, or the first 3 rounds at least, but they can make it up by getting sort of free recruits and stuff. We didn't have a great time. The player playing them didn't have a great time, but they were new when we were playing like a 6-player expansion faction game, so it could just be that I've not gone back to play them, so it could just be that they weren't 100% on top of what they should be doing as that faction. The mercenaries didn't make a huge impact on the game, but it could just be that it was one of the first things we added in. We maybe weren't utilising them too strongly. But otherwise, basically played most of the factions and played with the bridge, not played with the citadel.
Oh, we played with the Thames. Is that the bridge?
That's the bridge, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I don't think it changes things up massively having the different factions, but we've used the different marketplaces, so like the yellow marketplace, the purple marketplace.
Yeah, so we did that as well. We swapped in yellow and purple, which I'm not sure I'd recommend putting them both in the same game.
Nah, like you normally just switch out one, right?
Yeah, I would probably stick to switching out one marketplace rather than 2. So, well, 2 things actually. First off, Anarchy. I did play Anarchy from the new box. Anarchy's special power is that there are, at the end of the round, you have to pick an objective to score, and you will get more points if you score the current round objective, and there's 2 to choose from. And Anarchy's power is that it never gets to score the better points value, but at the end of the round, it gets to score both objectives. It was not useful. It's so difficult to like do 2 different objectives and get points for them. It's like, It's so much better to just focus on one thing and get better ratio for it. I was almost dead last. Despite having played the game the most. Yeah, I don't hate it as an idea either, but you need to be able to somehow make the most of that. And in a 5-player game with lots going on, it was just so difficult to maximize that. The value
occasionally, for that. Both objectives line up in a way that's useful. Have majority and have presence, for example, so you can actually
at the same color outpost. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So rarely they'll be overpowered, I guess, but other times you're not making the most out of that at all.
No, it really sort of forced you to divide your forces in a way that was never really beneficial. So in theory, a cool idea. In practice, really difficult. And their leader ability is really not great. If they end their movement in an area with an outpost, then they can have a free technology. But only once, and then you have to mark the outpost as hacked, and you can never benefit from that benefit there again. So really kind of limited. Again, we did implement the purple and the yellow marketplaces, which may well have also just added to the sort of overcomplication. I go because I've been playing the base game again since on BGA, and I feel like it is very tight, and it does feel very sort of like well balanced, albeit almost kind of prescriptive. Like I feel like going into the base game, you need to know that your very first set of cards should be about trying to secure 2 outposts to unlock your first feat ability. And if you don't know that, then you're going to miss out on that first power, and then it's all going to be like sort of an uphill battle from there, really. So I don't know if I necessarily like how prescriptive that is, but it's not like the expansions do anything to change that. And then the yellow and purple cards just add all this sort of extra stuff. That's the purple cards are 1 power and then a boosted power under certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was the yellow cards, and the purple cards are sort of a passive ability ongoing for the turn that you play the card. So you like want to lead with a purple card that gives you something cool, and then follow it up with a sort of matching card that benefits from the cool thing the purple card does. Or it might even be for the rest of the round, actually. I can't remember. But it's a cool idea. But I just felt like the cards in the base game were sort of tighter, and they felt more I don't know, just more balanced.
The expansions all broaden the game without deepening the game.
Yeah, I think like it still feels like, here's what you're doing. I mean, I guess Gaia and Psionics were substantially different experiences based just on what I saw, I don't know if you've tried the Psionics at all, but
No, I've not played with them, but
so there's 5 of them. So instead
as them, I should say.
You've not got a whole game. Well, I haven't played as them either. I was just watching this other player talk to them about it. But you got the 5 characters, but then each character has their own set of mission cards. And then when you activate that character, they're going to introduce 2 of the 3 mission cards that you then have to try and do. And you'll never use all 5 in a single game, so you're only going to use 4 of them. And so part of what you have to do is plan out the order in which you're going to bring them out to best accomplish their missions, and so maximize scoring from that, and also help you with whatever the current board situation is. And then they've got this sort of system of echoes, which is like a resource that upgrades over time that they need to like get through. So they need to be putting those out and using them to move on to like the 2nd and 3rd level echoes. It was like a whole lot more complexity, but I'm not sure if it was a whole lot more fun. And certainly they obfuscated the gameplay on the board in a way that sort of, I think, detracted from this traditional sort of area majority kind of enjoyment, right? And then Gaia is a faction that scores like all their points during the game as well. So like there was this sort of runaway element of Gaia just getting huge scoring during the game, and everyone was like, what, is this broken? But the answer is no, because Gaia can't really benefit from any of the end game scoring at all. So they've just got to earn all their points during the game. So their scoring looks wildly different to everyone else. And everyone's just going, I sure hope we can close this gap.
I kind of get what you're saying, and as much as that all sounds actually, if you describe that game to me with this sort of asymmetry of gameplay elements, I'd be like, okay, yeah, that sounds really interesting. But in practice, you're right enough. It's not, it doesn't seem to deepen it necessarily. I wonder if there's like a perfect setup or a good setup.
Yeah, a perfect combination.
Yeah, because there does seem to be enough in there. The additional leaders you get in the old London box for the base game ones, yeah, I'd always kind of switch out what's the purple team's ability, just like to grapple up something.
Yeah, the purple leader can move as though they had tactical movement. So they can move from the ground level to the roof level without an elevator.
You have to really abuse that early on if you want to do anything with it to get up.
Yeah, and then if Abraham's in the game, he could just use the harvester to steal the energy cores that you're trying to get to anyway. Like, it's so mean.
So I still, for all the flaws in the game, I do still enjoy it. And I do look forward to playing more of it. Perhaps one day I'll get the campaign to the table.
Oh my god. The campaign, yeah. There is something bizarrely compelling about it, but I was sort of wondering like how much lifespan it's really going to have after this latest play, which, I was sort of like, it felt very confused, and everyone felt very confused throughout, and then it just ended. You know.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So I wonder, you know, I'm tempted to go back to the base game and maybe try it with one sort of reasonable alteration, and I'd also like to try some of those alternate leaders for the base game factions, just because I think the one that counts as three dudes is just so powerful, and Abraham, I think if you can leverage,
he's the first guy I played.
yeah,
Great.
if you can leverage him correctly, like it's yeah, basically just unstoppable.
Yeah. So this is my control point now. Thank you. I have gone to the extreme lengths of buying Ludus Magnus's 2022 Essen magazine and the 2024 Essen magazine, which came with, in total, 4 additional promo cards for D.E.I. And cost more in shipping than. And I'm no interested in the magazine. Like, the magazine's €25. It's like, what? I don't even want any of this. Just give me the card. So I'll see if I can shift some of them on, because it comes with other promos as well. But one of them's a different end game objective, or not end game objective, but end round objective. Mm-hmm. And there's 3 black market action promo cards. Entirely not worth it, but I've gone for it anyway.
Yeah, you can send me a scan of those, right?
They're on Board Game Geek if you want them. Yeah, you could easily print them off yourself.
I suppose I could, but I don't know. I don't feel like I've scratched the surface of all the content in DEI, and now I'm not sure if I want to go through the trouble of trying all the different combinations and seeing where it comes out. Anyway, so I guess to sort of round up this summary for the patrons who are listening, going, but should I get the base set? I feel like the answer is currently probably not, for me anyway, Barry, and you can feel free to offer a counter perspective at the end. After all, you did just spend £25 on a 3-card expansion. But I think what's appealing about the game is that the rule set is relatively light, and there's a big sort of appeal value. And I think a lot of that's in the presentation. You know, the little dudes are cool. Everyone complained that I had the miniatures and not the meeples. They all thought the meeples would be better. That's fine. I'm not sure. I don't know. I like the dudes. I like the little miniatures. I like the way they sit on the map, which is sort of pseudo-realistic. I think it looks cool. I think the meeples are probably also really nice, I imagine. So there's a sort of a toy factor there that's very appealing. I feel like the game struggles with length because I think its overall playtime is about right, but the 4 rounds feels a bit too short, and it feels like it prescribes a very structured way of playing. You know, like you've got these 3 powers that you draft at the beginning of the game that are then tied into both end game scoring and what you do in the game. You want to unlock them typically in an optimized order, but you'll take whatever order you can get usually, and you have to start trying to unlock those right away. Now, I do wonder if there's a good strategy or broader strategy that involves ignoring those entirely, but I think that they're worth enough points and their unique powers are impactful enough on the game that they are good to do and prioritize. So I just feel like the game would benefit from being around longer, so you had a little bit more time to open those up, or to like not just focus on them right away, or to get the benefits from them if you do. So that's weird, but then I don't think the game wants to be longer just in terms of time. I'm not sure the base factions are all really well balanced, even though the actual the card markets feel most balanced in the core game, and that's really good. On the other hand, the transporter for the black faction, which is their drone, sucks, and it puts 3 drone cards for that drone into the game, which suck. And if they come out, nobody buys them, and then that's effectively a dead market, which is a pain, because the cards will never cycle unless someone buys them. And so possibly a kill a card mechanism would have worked quite well, like at the end of a round, ditch the leftmost card or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy house rule to.
I'm not going to start house ruling it to fix their game, Barry. But yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm not actually totally opposed to house rules either. So you could definitely do that. Or if it's the end of the round and no one bought from the market, wipe it. Something like that. Just because, yeah, like the transport is so useless, which again comes back to the point that it's a good thing that the mercenaries exist, because I think they add a variant drone that you could try to incorporate. I haven't tried that. But just having more different drones, is probably helpful. Oh, and actually that reminds me, just on the point of anarchy, one of the things that was very cool about them is like their whole thing is we do whatever we want because we're anarchists. So like all of their action cards are like, you get to do 2 actions, but you can pick from a huge menu.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got lots of these slash this, slash this, slash this. Whereas like a lot of the base game factions have cards that are just like move twice or enlist twice, so that's really cool. But overall, like I just, it's not a super cheap game, and I just feel like for sort of a area majority game, you could be playing. You could be playing El Grande, which is fantastic and back in print and half the price.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a hard argument to make. I mean, El Grande has maybe a bit more of a learning curve, but probably not that much, really. You could, if you like hand management, action selection, you could be playing Concordia, which also has a bit of sort of not area control, but area contention.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. Like it's hard. It's a hard one to recommend. If you really like Toy Factor, that's there. But I've probably just got it because I probably only played it this much because I bought it and it's on PGA.
Yeah, I mean, but similarly, how many games of it have you had compared to the average game on your shelf?
More, but I can't justify why.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing. Like I played this at whenever it was 2 years ago at Expo or something, and I immediately went and bought it. I just had so much. It's just fun. I would disagree. I would say at least give it a try before you buy it. It's maybe not the game you think it is, right? You're not killing dudes on a map. There's not fighting. It is area control. But if you look at it, particularly with the plastic miniatures, you're maybe thinking it's a little more aggressive than it is. And it is aggressive, but in a different way. You're not often blowing people up to get them off the board. Instead, you're trying to move more people in. The area control element is a temporary type of area control. You want to control it at the end of your turn, but you don't particularly care if somebody comes in and takes it off you afterwards, because you're probably having to move on to the next thing for the next round of scoring anyway. So you score your objectives at the end of your turn, and therefore other people aren't messing you up in quite the same way, but there is a lot of blocking, and the big counts as 3 dudes leader can often get in your way when you're trying to do something. But I can't say not to buy it because it's a fun game.
Well,
I don't think you need everything. I think if you've got the base set, you might want to think about picking and choosing which expansions you want. I don't think you need everything by any stretch, because it doesn't really, as I say, deepen the experience. But you may want a couple of... You could probably print off the extra leaders for the base game factions, because there's no... It doesn't come with anything else. It just, it's a couple of bits of cardboard that tell you you're playing a different leader. And they'll have an icon for their abilities anyway, so just look up the rules online.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair enough. Yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely not in a position to offer a buying guide for the expansions. I suppose if you wanted the most sort of stark variety, it's the expansion that comes with the Gaia and the Wolves and the Psionics factions, which are all play very differently to the ones in the base game. But I actually also feel like they detracted the most from the game because they undermined the contention, because they all had different mission cards and different objectives, and it's hard for people to tell what they were actually supposed to be trying to do. But I also think like maybe this, I think that's maybe the most interesting thing about it, is that it is a game that's dynamic, right? Like you care about having the right majority at the right time in the exact right moment, and then immediately afterwards you don't care at all. Which is interesting, but I'm not sure if it's necessarily that great. Well, the other thing I'd mention is that the basic game setup puts 4 outposts in the same region. I don't know why they did that. That's never going to happen except in that like one particular setup. So, that makes one region extremely hotly contested, but it's almost always won by the guy who's worth 3 anyway. And once they sit there, then it's basically over. But, I think like, if you're sort of interested in area control or sort of area contention and control, I just feel like there's all these great sort of classic games that are interesting and, better, albeit for some reason there's some sort of lightness to this that is comforting, I suppose. I don't know. But, I mean, also this probably is best at 3 or 4. I don't think it necessarily benefits from 5 or 6 players.
Not played 5, I've played 6. It was fine.
Well, there you go. But if I had 6 players, well, actually, to be fair, it's hard to find games for 6 players. If I had 5, I'd probably rather play El Grande or Hansa Teutonica. But if I had 6, I couldn't play either of those. So I guess I'd have to play D.E.I. There we go.
Boom. Sold.
All right. What's your next one?
So a couple of bits and pieces I got just before Christmas. This is D.E.I. I've never played solo, but this is a game I have played solo a number of times, and it's Terraforming Mars. And just before the new year, they came out with an Automa expansion. So previously, you would just kind of have a little. You'd just be playing your own game. You'd try and beat a score if you're playing the base game. It later introduced that you have to terraform the whole planet by generation 14 or 12, depending on whether or not you're playing with Prelude. But now they've given us a proper second player when you're playing solo. And I've got that to the table to give it a try. I was in the mood for a bit of Terraforming Mars, and rather than play on the app or on Board Game Arena, I thought, you know what, I'll play it in real life with the new expansion. And so this is designed by Jacob Frixelius and published by Frix Games.
Editor Mike just jumping in here to point out that Terraforming Mars is designed by Jacob Frixelius. The Terraforming Mars Automa expansion is designed by Nick Shaw and David Turkchi.
And another company that's going to be leaning on AI art. In fact, has leaned on AI art, I think, in the Prelude too.
Have they?
I think so, yeah. But arguably, they were only using stock images, edited stock images before. So using edited AI art's not massively different. But then again, people are still getting paid for stock images. I don't know. Let's not get back into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think it's an excuse. I don't think we can say the art was bad already, so it's probably fine.
No.
But yeah, in the interest of time, let's move on.
Yeah, speaking of a game that like uses screenshots, some did, some didn't. Anyway, so the Automa, you still got the same end game conditions of trying to terraform Mars by generation 12 or 14, but now you've got what's effectively another player interrupting and interfering with kind of what you're doing. And so the Automa has 8 tracks, 10 tracks, which you have to manage. Well, you don't have to manage, you don't have to do anything. You just flip over a card and you see what it does. So the Automa will get cards from the deck the same way you might when you're drawing up at the start of the turn. You can even draft with the Automa if you wanted. And probably the recommended way of playing. for that. But you flip it over, you look at the tags, and then depending on what the tags on the card are, it moves up that track, and then under the track there's usually an action, and then you take that action, and it could be, the AI builds a forest or builds a city, or the AI goes up to terraforming rating, or whatever the points thing called, or the AI will claim a milestone, or it will claim an award, whatever one it's best poised to win. It will occasionally interfere with you, sort of directly in terms of taking resources, but not too often. But what you'll find is that it actually puts quite a lot out on the board, which pushes the terraforming of Mars forward to end the game a lot sooner. So if you're building up your little microbe and floater engine, it's looking to take away a lot of your endgame points while still pushing forward the development of Mars, or the terraforming of Mars, if you will, which prevents you really from just sitting there playing with your microbes and your floaters and your action cards. You're having to oftentimes accelerate your game plan to keep up with it and have enough endgame scoring on the board. So playing against it was interesting. I wasn't super sure of what it could do in that first game, and so I went for an engine build, thought I could maybe outpower it, but actually I was too slow to getting things down on Mars, and it had a number of cities, a number of forests, and it was really, and won 2 of the 3 milestones, and I think at least 2 of the awards as well. And basically the end game scoring, I was done, and I was like, oh, that was close, I won by like 3 points, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, I've not added up the points for the greenery and the cities on the board, and I did it, and I lost by like 20. I didn't lose by 20 points, but I lost by a significant number of points. I was like, oh no, I wasn't focused on terraforming Mars, and that's the name of the game. And so the way that the Automa works is there's a different overlay for every map, because there's now a variety of maps for terraforming Mars. There are some abilities that will reference some of the other expansions, whether that's Venus, whether that Venus Next, or whether that is colonies, and the way it does different things depending on whether you're playing with those expansions. So sometimes you'll move along a track and it won't do anything, but were you playing an expansion game, it would do something. And other than a small deck of cards which are exclusively for the computer to beat you, you're just shuffling in normal cards or drafting normal cards. It gets 4 a turn, or 4 in a round, a generation, and you flip them over to see what happens, and then you just follow the icons. And if you've already played Terraforming Mars, you'll be very familiar with all the icons. So there was no real overhead in doing that. It felt a lot more like playing against a very competent human. But I think with repeated plays, I should be able to defeat it. I think I just played a little bit too scared that first game because I didn't know what was going to happen. There is a lot of icons on that board. I didn't know how quickly it'd be moving up them, or what it'd be doing. When you're evaluating the awards and milestones, you're looking at how far along those tracks they are. It's like, oh, I've got loads of time, and then by the end, actually, you don't have loads of time. And it was all, it was very smooth. It was very easy to operate, something I'm always looking for when you're playing an Automa like this. You don't want to be doing a lot of overhead. You don't want it to feel like you're playing a whole second game at the same time. Often you want to be focusing on what you're doing, and this managed it really well. I think it was a really, if you play a lot of solo Terraforming Mars, this is definitely worth getting. Or even if you don't like the sort of chase your high score type games, then this is also worth doing, because it'll vary game to game, it'll vary map to map, and definitely well worth it.
Ah, cool. That's cool. Yeah.
and you can play with all your favorite people.
Me and my best mate, Automa.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to hear that it's an actual functioning Automa, not just some, Kickstarter gimmick. That's nice. You know, I do like Terraforming Mars, but I can't. It's again not necessarily the kind of thing I'd play solo, but I do enjoy it. I don't have the Automa, so I guess I won't be trying that out.
Yep.
But I've been playing something that does have a solo mode. I can't possibly imagine how or why you'd play solo mode. It's Stationfall from 2022. Have you played it, Barry?
I have not. I did see it when it came out, of course, but I've not played it or even seen anybody playing it.
Yep. It definitely didn't receive widespread distribution, I don't think, although I did have a chance to play it once. Somebody at the club in London backed it, so I played it with them, and then I had a chance to play it again recently because somebody had bought it from a club I'm in up here now, and we played it 3 times, so I've played it a lot now. That is to say 4 times,
Good.
which is a lot for me. So now I'm going to talk about it. It is 1 to 9 players. It's 60 to 150 minutes. Yeah, maybe. It's about right. It might go a bit longer. Its weight is 3.91 out of 5. That's according to BGG. The designer is Matt Eklund, and the artists are Madeleine Fjall, Anna Isaacson, and Josephine Strand, and the publisher's Ion Game Design. And so the premise of Stationfall is that it is a space station in the orbit around Earth, and there are a whole host of characters on board the station who have been working there and doing various different projects on board the space station and things like that. And now some disastrous event has occurred and the station is plummeting towards the planet's surface, hence Stationfall. You have a remaining amount of time to achieve your objective before the station collides with Earth and everyone is killed. Not on Earth. They'll probably be fine. The station might even burn up in the atmosphere. There is no repercussions in that regard. But you need to get off the station, or maybe you don't. It depends what your objectives are. But if you're playing in a 6-player game, you have 11 minutes to get off the station. If you're playing in a lower count game, it's 15 minutes. So realistically, like obviously this is a number of rounds. It's abstracted. It's not a real-time game. But thematically, it truly is the last desperate manic actions in the face of imminent disaster. So I've got like a little sort of thought here about competitive games. Because this is technically a competitive game, but it's also a very Ludo narrative, sort of emergent Ludo narrative type game. You've got all these characters, but at the beginning of the game, each player will receive 2 characters. So you seed the ship with characters, and there's 10 or 12 maybe. There's a whole bunch of characters on the ship, on the station. And then each character has a secret identity card that's shuffled up and handed out to players. You get 2, and you pick one of those characters to be your main character and one to be your bonus character, which is very minor. And then you put them face down in front of you. So functionally, you are one of the characters on the station, but nobody knows who you are, and you don't have to reveal who you are at all during the game. And does it help people if they know who you are? Kind of. It's not really the main focus. The main focus is now that you're one of these characters, they've got a set of objectives that they have to complete, and you have to try to do that. And each character's objectives usually work out to be about up to 9 points. And then your bonus character can achieve anything from sort of 1 to 3 points or 4 points. So, your best score is going to be about 10 or 12 points, and your worst score is like 0, right? And so at the end of the game, whoever's achieved the most points by sort of fulfilling the objective of their characters is the winner. There's a whole bunch of tiebreakers, but also the game is so chaotic and crazy that at 6 players, there's just straight up 2 winners. And I mean, like, yeah, okay, you could say whoever had the most points is the real winner or whatever, but the game is like, there are 2 winners. There's no tiebreak for that. It's just 2 winners. The other thing is, there's this idea that you and your objective, and you might have like sort of quite thematically understandable objectives, right? Like there's a colonel, a military colonel, and their objective is to release Weapon X, which is a randomly designated. So there is a bunch of Weapon X cards that come in the box, and one of them is randomly laid out during setup. And the colonel wants to release it and then escape from the station because the colonel's objective is controlled weapons test. So we've got 10 minutes. Everyone's going to die anyway. Might as well release the secret weapon and see if it works, and then get off because the station, because we don't want to die here, but we're quite happy to see what happens to everyone else. There's also the border. Border is in someone who comes on board. They start off of the station and they really want the briefcase, which is an item that is as mysterious and abstract as the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. They want to come onto the space station, grab the briefcase, and get off the station, right? That's their objective. So those 2 characters, fairly understandable. Then there are characters like the telepathic rat, which has a whole series of special rules because it's in a container and it can't move, it can't do anything itself, but it can control people and make them do its bidding. And its objective is it just wants everyone to die. So it just wants to end the game in a room surrounded by dead people. You've got this idea that during the days and weeks and months leading up to the beginning of the game, you are building a network of people who are going to help you achieve these objectives. So the action selection mechanism in the game is this sort of abstraction of that. It's called building your conspiracy. And you have a certain amount of influence that you can spend to control any character on the space station. And you can continue to put out influence and take control of other characters until a player reveals that they are that character, and then only they can control that character. But until they reveal that, you can just put influence on different characters and just take control of them, and that's an abstraction of this idea that they're part of your conspiracy, and they're doing that thing that you discussed earlier, that you really need them to do. So on your turn, you control one character by putting some influence out and then taking an action with that character. It's a little bit more complex, but don't worry about it. And then they go around and do something. And so this idea that, 6 characters are going to act, or 5 characters are going to act before your next turn, and it could be you, is so chaotic. Coming back to this idea of a competitive game, yes, there are points. Yes, there are winners. Yes, there are tie breaks. I don't know after 4 games of it if I'm any better at it than when I first started. I understand the rules better. There's quite a lot of rules overhead. Remember what I said about Weapon X? There's a lot of stuff that happens on this ship. There's a nuclear core that you can take out. You can set it on fire. You can create hazards. You can cut the power down to different levels. It's got 2 centrifuges that have gravity and a core alignment that thing that doesn't have any gravity. So there's tons of rules. You can go out of the ship and come back into the ship. There's all these escape pods that can only be launched under certain circumstances. And if the legal character is in the game, then everyone needs to sign an NDA before they leave the space station. There's like all these sort of rules. So there's a lot of rules overhead. It's definitely a game where like people need to sort of play it a bunch of times to get their head around the systems. Like the round-to-round execution is actually relatively straightforward and simple, but knowing what to do, like at all, then you're left with these big choices like when do you reveal who you are and stuff like that is very, very, very difficult to sort of get your head around until you've sort of seen the game in action. But having said that, having played 4 games of it, I don't think I'm any better at it now, and I'm not sure going into the next game if I would be necessarily any better. And in some ways, it can feel like based on your initial character draw and the other characters that are in the game, you could just be screwed by having a character that wants to do something that is just completely opposed to what everyone else wants to do. Like if you're the colonel on a station full of people that want to release Weapon X, like the cyborg, then you're in a much, or the corpsicle, then you're in a much better position than if you're on a ship full of people that like the troubleshooter that want, or the stranger that want to keep the ship intact. So there's a huge amount of sort of setup that can just really make your life more or less difficult. And given that you have so few actions, remember it's only minutes before the whole thing is about to explode. You have so few actions. You have to be really careful about what you do with those actions, but you're also trying to an extent to be secretive about your main motivations. I don't know if it's really a competitive game in that sense, not like chess is a competitive game where you focus on being competitive and getting better and improving your skill over time, right? It's a competitive game just to give the lunacy of what's actually happening a framework. Having said that, I really have quite enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. I've only won it once, but and I didn't even place in the last two games at all. I've really enjoyed it. Every time the characters are changed up, it feels significantly different. I think it wants to be 6 players, or maybe even it could be more. It's just really like sort of fun and chaotic. Now, there is an element of at the end, particularly when some characters have escaped, if you want to escape, or if your character's been eliminated because something in the game has wiped them out entirely. That's quite rare. Usually characters are just downed and are recoverable, although it's very difficult. There is an element of like players have nothing left to do but just sabotage you. So again, this comes back to like, is it really super competitive? Like some characters just want to exist on the station at the end. And so they're kind of the most vulnerable to players who have actions left, but no investment in the game anymore other than sabotaging whoever's left on the station. So it's not like flawless, but by any stretch, and like I said, it's kind of just pure chaos, really. But it is really good fun, and it's just crazy, and it's tense, and it's sort of fun to see what's going on and what everyone's doing, and I've really enjoyed the 4 games I've played of it. They've all run probably about 3 hours, so I think the game time there is a little under, but they've also all been 6 players, so it might be quicker with fewer players. But there's also there's a lot of rules overhead. I haven't talked at all about evidence and guilt and going to prison and releasing articles to the press. So I haven't talked about the compromat, which is compromising evidence you can use to manipulate other people. So there's a lot of rules overhead for what is functionally kind of just a chaotic sort of space adventure game. But I think also like it doesn't really matter because it's kind of just fun to see what happens. Mm-hmm. And if you are taking out the game early, you can just play really vindictively. And that's, I think if you have a chance to try Stationfall, I definitely think it's a very unique and weird and interesting game. And I'd recommend.
Cool. Yeah, like I see there's an excellent 3D station on Board Game Geek.
Oh, I saw that. I saw that. That's
extra. But
yeah, it probably takes a hot minute to get your head around the map layout. This is a game that you sort of need to, I think, commit to, like I said, because it's got a huge amount of rules overhead for what is functionally sort of chaotic, fun, sort of narrative storytelling, right? Like it is, it's all the story parts of Nemesis without the game fighting against you. It's just players.
Very cool. Well, I'll tell you where players are not fighting against each other, and that is in a solo playthrough of War of the Ring, the card game.
I was wondering where you were going with that, because I was like, Worth the Ring. Players are definitely fighting against. Oh yeah, okay, the solo mode.
Yeah. So that this is designed by Ian Brody and published by Ares Games, and the latest expansion, I want to say, is called something like Flame, Fire and Stone. That sounds right.
I want to say Fire and Swords.
Oh, it could be Fire and Swords, but is it not? What's the Balrog? What does Gandalf say about made of flame and
shadow? Fire and
So the expansion comes with cards for on the good guide side, a few extra dwarfs, very welcome, since only Gimli and his axe were in the base game. Some extra elves, but new faction being Northmen and sort of like the Men of Dale for the Fellowship side, and for the Sauron side comes with ruffians, so that's like Sharky and during the scouring of the Shire, there's a few extra monsters and grunt and there as well. But the first expansion to the core set was Against the Shadow, I want to say, and that introduced solo rules. So the solo game is, whilst fundamentally the same, has a whole different set of cards. So the Shadow player, the Sauron player, that entire deck is replaced with a solo only deck, because some of the abilities would otherwise require choices that the AI couldn't make, the Automa couldn't make.
Yeah.
So this second expansion also comes with additional cards for the solo mode, and a couple of different game variations. So worth maybe explaining a little bit. The War of the Ring card game is played across up to 9 rounds, where on one side of the game is the path, and that is for the ring bearer to be moving through towards Mount Doom and chucking the ring in, and the other side is the battlegrounds, where out and out fighting is happening, whether Minas Tirith or Osgiliath or whatever's going on the other side. And the game will end once the final path is done, whether victory or loss for either side. But basically, every battleground you win, you're earning points, and every path you move down, you're earning points. The Shadow player can earn some additional points through corrupting the Fellowship on the path, but you're playing cards by pitching cards. So every card has a cost of discarding another card from your hand, regardless of whether it's Saruman or whether it's Barleyman Butterbur, right? Every card costs the same, but of course every card has its own strengths and weaknesses depending on when it is. The key part of the game is that only certain cards can go to certain bits thematically and mechanically. That's represented mechanically by something like Gaffer Gamgee can only be on the path in locations 1 and 2, because later on he's obviously still back in the Shire. He's not going to be going to Mount Doom to chuck the ring in. And on the battlefield, only the Ents can only be fighting at Orthanc. They can't be traipsing around the world fighting at Minas Tirith or whatever else. So there's only certain battlefields that certain characters can go to based on their faction, and there's only certain parts of the story that characters can influence, and that's just a value, whether that's a single value. Like Shelob would only appear at path 8, just before Frodo and Sam get into Mordor proper. Whereas somebody like Frodo can be at all the stages in the game. And so it's a competitive card game doing what competitive card games do. You're comparing your attacks and defense, and you're earning points for winning battlefields and paths. The solo mode represents the shadow player by giving them a set number of cards every round, which are flipped over, and there's a number of actions on there. Either if they can realistically win either one of the fights, they'll go directly there. Otherwise, they go into the staging area until a point when they can compete and win a fight. And so what ends up happening is you end up with like a huge reserve for the shadow player, and you're trying to build up your reserve. So at the point when they go there, you can dwindle their reserves down so you can win a future fight. Because it's very hard to win against the shadow player when they're at full strength. But after they've swung in, then you can kind of make up some points again. You're pushing through the paths as quickly as possible, because that tends to favour the fellowship side, whereas the battles obviously tend to favour the shadow side. And very broad overviews. It's quite a good game. I didn't super enjoy I actually prefer it solo than I do competitively, and particularly competitively at 4 players. So at 4 players each, there's two shadow players, 2 fellowship players. You each control different factions, and so deciding who's going to play what when just becomes a discussion that's less interesting, I feel, than making the decisions myself. So, and this new expansion, it takes that even further, because now you can play 6 player with 3 shadow players and 3 fellowship players with different cards. Everybody's got different cards.
That sounds chaotic. I love it. I'd love to try that.
I'd definitely give it a go again at the higher player count, and 6 players would be pretty interesting. But I think my preferred way of playing it is solo. And so the solo version comes with a new scenario, which is epic. I want to say like epic fellowship. And you basically play twice as many paths. So you'll play 2 path 1s, 2 path 2s, 2 path 3s. And it goes on and on and on and on. And you only get certain cards. The first time you cycle through your deck, add these cards. The next time you cycle through your deck, add these cards. So there's a little bit more faff in the setup, but otherwise it's not too bad, right? The core game's still the same for what's going on, and it's structured in a way where it's quite thematic, because by the time you're on path 4, all the rosy cottons cycled out of your deck, or could have cycled out of your deck, and then you're getting by the time you're getting towards the end and you're in you're in Gondor and you're getting all your Gondor allies to play, but you're coming up against Grund. Whereas you were never going to find Grund when you were still in the Shire. When you're in the Prancing Pony, Grund is not bursting down the door. And so the game structures it in a way where the story is told not flawlessly, but enough that it gives you quite a strong feel for where you are in the story. Anyway, I played it. Took about I want to say it took a couple hours at least to kind of get through the whole game, up to the beginning of path 8. So whilst there's ways of skipping through the path a little quicker, I think I played most of them. So that is 14 out of the 18 rounds. It's 25 points apiece. I was like, okay, right, four to go. Let's see what I can do. I ended up losing 50 to 32. Those last few fights were just absolutely devastating. I didn't do enough to keep on top of what the shadow was up to. I'd burned most of my cards that I needed for the end game. I had a few unlucky. You can forsake cards to sometimes pay for things, which is discard them permanently. And a couple of cards that would really helped. I ended up forsaking off the top of the deck. But that's a choice, right? Because you can always forsake a card that you know rather than a card that you don't. But if you're wanting to play a card, do you forsake it from in play or off the top of your deck? But it didn't work out for me. Let's put it that way. But it was it's still the same strong game. I know we talked about ratings before. I think I rated the base game a 7, and then I rated Against the Shadow an 8. Just because the solo feels more fun than the competitive version. And this maintains that as well. There's a few extra scenarios that you can play through. You don't always have to follow the story necessarily. But yeah, it was good. The extra cards are welcome. I didn't get the promos, so I'll have to chase them down. But yeah, recommended, and I will hopefully at some point give the 6-player epic a go. I don't know if I want to play it at 6 players, but I will play it at 6 players. Just to see how it goes. But I'm looking forward to more expansions and more cards. Obviously, big War of the Ring fan, big Lord of the Rings fan. And the card game does satisfy the feel of the books and the films, more so the books, of course, because that's what they're based on. And you can get some really interesting, or you can get some narratives that really match the books, but you're not forced to always follow the story of the Lord of the Rings. But yeah, that's most of what I've been playing. There are plenty of other games on the horizon. Oh, one thing I'll throw in, if one of the early podcasts and one of the first games I bought last year was the Plum Island Horror. I think I've spoken about not getting it to the table a few times now. So last week or last weekish, I set it up and I got everything ready, and I was like, okay, I better relearn the rules here because I've not really made it through a whole game, and it sat there for like 3 days, and I did not find myself wanting to go back to it. I'm just I think I've learned a little about what I'm looking for in solo games, and that is not something where you're looking at tables and head in the rules all the time. You want a core loop that's easy enough to understand and run. That's the biggest part of playing solo, I would think. And so I think I might end up getting rid of both Plum Island Horror and Mr. President, because that's just books, nothing but books, in favour of games where the Automa's easy to run, and where the so it's not taking up your mental capacity to run the game. But whether or not that's fair, I don't know, because I never really got to the end of a full session of Plum Island Horror.
Anything? Any teasers for us, Barry?
No, I don't think there's much big to come. I guess I'll probably have played more Fellowship games, with the trick-taking game out now-ish, in a couple of days. And I feel like Flamme Rouge Grand Tour is supposed to be out soon. But maybe not in time for next podcast. But who knows what unexpected Kickstarters may show up.
Who knows what's coming? Or, returns to old classics if nothing new arrives, which is always nice. I know I'm trying to get an 8-player game of Thrones in the diary.
Oh, no.
So if you want to hear us discuss that, then make sure you subscribe and do all those things you need to do to find out more, to follow us on whatever platform you choose to listen to this on.
There's a greater chance of George R.R. Martin finishing Winds of Winter than there is catching me an 8-player game. Okay.
But there is 100% chance of catching Barry on the next podcast if you turn on notifications or whatever, wherever that is.
Just here. There.
Do the things. We'll catch y'all next time. Thanks so much for listening.
Bye.